All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alt-Tab, the event where students give talks to students. This term, we've got an amazing lineup of speakers coming from a diverse range of backgrounds, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to all of them. I'm your host, Ravindu, and I will be introducing the speakers to you. Going first is Mary, who will be talking about traffic engineering. For those of you who are going to take CS 350, pay close attention to this one because it'll probably help you with assignment 1. Next is Dmytro giving a talk about blind signatures and their applications. This one has a heavy focus on math and cryptography. If you're interested, make sure to watch this. After that, we actually have a group of 2 presenting, Christian and Jerry. They'll be talking about various topics related to contest programming. Maybe this will give you some hints on how to solve your CS assignments or even interview questions. Last but not least, we've got Neil talking about automatic differentiation. It will be extremely helpful if you like computer algebra and other related fields. Now, before we start, I want to mention that we've got a Slido link that you can use to ask anonymous questions that I will put right here in the chat. At the end of each talk, we will start a 5-minute Q&A session with the speaker where these questions will be asked. You can also ask questions in Twitch chat, and we'll do our best to ask the speaker your question. If your question isn't answered during the Q&A session, don't worry, because we'll ask speakers any remaining questions at the end if time permits. Now that you have all the info, everyone please welcome Mary talking about traffic engineering.
Awesome. So I'm going to be talking about transportation engineering. I've taken some courses in it, and I just kind of find it's really neat, so decided I'd talk about it. Transportation engineering is a broad field. It's everything involving how do we, from traffic networks to a whole bunch of other things, but a lot of what I've been focusing on has just been on roads, because roads are such an important and visible part of the field. So imagine you're driving along, and then all of a sudden, there's a moose on the road. One of the first things you then have to think about is, okay, I see this moose. How can I stop before I hit it, or any other sort of large things? One of the most important concepts that a lot of everything else bases off of is just how long does it take for us to stop? Can we hit the moose? Will we hit the moose? And so in this way, it's nice because there's a bit of physics, a very basic formula. You take your velocity, your current speed, and I'm not going to go into the derivation of it because I always forget how this is derived, but I've listened to it before. And so main other things to note in this formula is like the perception reaction time. So with this, the main 2 parts are like, okay, how long does it take for you to react to something? And then how long does it actually take for you to slow down? So the first part is like the perception reaction time is interesting because depending on what sort of scenario you're in, it'll then change your perception reaction time, and it can change person to person. So like we know that older people often have slow but they have slow reaction times, so they compensate for this. So that's sort of an interesting thing, and as well as the fact, so mu is often related to physics. G is lowercase g is gravity. G is the grade of the road. But in like if it's a 1% grade of a road, it's on like you then have it as like 0.01. And so an interesting thing for Canadians is that our mu value is especially dependent on like, snow and ice could definitely make that value much lower. And that could then really affect just how long it actually takes you to stop and slow down. And so something that seems so simple, okay, I need to stop. But then it's like, okay, but how far is it going to take me to stop? How long is it going to take me to stop? And it really then is interesting just how so much of traffic is really just not about stopping to moving as opposed to in general. So yeah, so we know how long it might take us to stop, and we can calculate this for a variety of different scenarios. Where can we use this knowledge? So this is a classic GIF that people often like to, of just, okay, trying to move around, get through. And it sort of relates to the main idea of a lot of things. It's just a whole bunch of different types of intersections that we use. Thankfully, in Canada, we don't have anything like the one on the top right, which is a very famous, and I can imagine actually driving on that roundabout. Also note it's in like because it's in England, everything's backwards. But then some of the other things are definitely more common depending on like the type of road. A lot of this is basically demand. Like if you the very basic one, a four-way stop intersection is great when all demand is about equal and there's definitely low demand. We next have the one in this bottom right hand corner, which is a two-way stop intersection. That's when you have a major street and a minor street, and the minor street can only basically go when there's gaps. An interesting thing with this is in sort of like the priority in which different movements have. So when you're driving, you know that if you're trying to take a left-hand turn from a minor street to a major street, you might be there a while, and how that affects different things. Next classic one is ones on our most major streets in North America is just the traffic lights in intersections. You might have some left-hand only turning lanes. You might have right-hand only right turning lanes, depending on the type of intersection and the demands. And that's something that's only recently come back into Canada after, and then North America in general, after the previous iteration. So before roundabouts, there was traffic circles. Traffic circles were almost in some ways the main differences between traffic circles and roundabouts is that traffic circles were usually larger. They had priority the opposite way. So if you were in the intersection, you had to yield to people entering into the intersection, often led to gridlock. And so that was a major issue with them. And so North Americans were like, nah, these things don't work. We like our traffic light intersections. Whereas like Europe was like, yo, we can just improve these. And then because one of the major benefits of roundabouts is the fact that movement throughout the intersections is a lot safer because you're less likely to have like T-bone collisions. You're most likely to have it. And actually in the Waterloo region, every intersection where they've replaced the roundabout, except for one, has experienced less collisions, and of the collisions it has also received, they have been of lesser severity because of this fact that you're less likely to have T collisions, which is great. But one of the downfalls of roundabouts is that they are a bit more of a pain to calculate the values, and they don't have quite as nice of a connection to mutual exclusion like the traffic signals do, which makes sense because that's why one is often a CS 350 assignment and one is not. So one of the first things to sort of think about when in these sort of things, it's so just kind of interesting, is just how many lanes should there be in each road, and how does this then affect the design of different things and just sort of different shapes. I think that's one thing that I really find fascinating about roads is just all of the different shapes that they have. Like as you can sort of see, these are the two ones that are the top middle and the top right are the same intersection, just different views and like slightly different angles, I realize now. And so you can see that with here, there's definitely going to be a lot of right-hand traffic, so much that they have a specific right-hand turning lane. Like I just think that's just kind of crazy that there's that much demand to go right. But as you can notice is that like with this one, then commonly there's like a specific left-hand turning lane, but this one doesn't have that because their demand is much more right, like towards the right as opposed to going to the left, and then just like having the specific left-hand turning lane, even on the major streets, which is I think definitely less common. Most of them are usually like this one on the that I've seen for two-way stop intersections. Two-way stop controlled intersections. Oops, I went forward. What did I even do? And so that's a sort of an interesting sort of commentary, just like how number of lanes. This also works with traffic intersections in general, when you can sort of then think about, okay, like how many lanes should there be on University Avenue, on like Phillip Street? How does this, should there be left-hand turning lanes? Should there be a right-hand turning lane? All of these sort of things are stuff that like needs to be considered really before road happens, because that's one of, I guess, the interesting things compared to computer science is that like it's a lot harder, a lot more expensive to change really anything for any sort of roads, and you have a lot of just interesting constraints sometimes of like the geography and the geometry of the area around it. And so it's like really important to like collect all of your data beforehand and sort of see, okay, like how is this going to affect this, and as the traffic grows. So it's a sort of commentary on just types of lanes that could be included, right-hand lanes, direct lanes. There's a whole bunch of formulas and stuff in terms of calculations, but we're not going to go into the we're not going to go into any of the math in this because time constraints. It is interesting though to sort of think about just because like if a vehicle like on the minor street wants to turn left, in order for them to do so, they need to wait for there to be a gap in the traffic going in, not only in this case in this direction, like going going on both ways across the major street. Plus, any vehicles that are turning right in the other direction would also have priority over them. Plus, any vehicles going straight in the other direction. So they're really just, I'm just trying to consider all of this. There's a whole bunch of stats and stuff, which is kind of gross. Anyways, so then we get to then sort of going into the last sort of main section I'm going to be focusing on in this. There's a lot more, but time constraints, rather sad, is designing traffic in light intersections. So one of the major things with traffic lights is just how long to make each section, and especially the yellow and the red. And that is because of something called the dilemma zone. So this is a picture. I didn't want to draw it myself, so I used the one that one of my profs had used. And so that's basically the idea that once the light turns yellow, you need to get out of the intersection. You either need to clear it or you need to stop beforehand. And so with this, it's sort of demonstrating that, from the front of the vehicle, either the front of the vehicle needs to be behind the white line, or the back of the vehicle needs to be like on the other side of the intersection. So what can sometimes happen though is that depending on the length of the intersection, the length of the vehicle and the speed of the vehicle, you can end up with scenarios where a vehicle can't safely get across, do either one. They can't stop before the intersection is before the all reds period is empty. That's like the period where it's yellow for them and it's red for everyone in all directions of the intersection. And they also can't clear the intersection. So they're sort of in a really tough situation, especially if you consider like the idea of red light cameras, because then you're like, well, I literally have no way of not getting stuck here. And because that's one thing that when the limitations of the common, like the CS assignment, the CS 350 assignment was that like, it was just, okay, cool, they're good. We can just we completely for sure always waited. Whereas here it's like, okay, but like when does the next people start? So that's definitely something that's kind of an interesting sort of idea is, okay, what do we do about this dilemma zone? How can we reduce it? So one of the interesting things with this, and you can do a whole bunch of calculations. And so here's like an example where it's the same amount of, the same amount of the all reds periods, that's like the yellow and the red period for all directions, as well as like everything the same speed, seeing how the speed comparisons for like, let's say, you have a self-driving car, which might be able to have a faster reaction time as opposed to the human cars, which might have a larger reaction, like a slower reaction time. And so here you can sort of interestingly see that for some speeds, self-driving cars are going to do great, but even so, at if the traffic is too slow, regardless, everyone's still going to have issues. The self-driving cars will have less, but there's still issues to be considered, especially depending on other factors. And so that's one interesting thing is that you think about, okay, like how could once self-driving cars are like more widespread, how would we could redesign intersections to make them more efficient? But a lot of the things is that we can maybe make some adjustments, but a lot of the things, the minimum length, still need to be there because of the fact that there's still reaction times. There's still like the actual either deceleration time or the time to actually clear the intersection. It's not just the reaction time, which is the important part, which I think is just kind of neat. Cool. I actually talked faster than I expected to. So we're on to the question part.
Thanks, Mary. Now we will move on to the questions. Let me just check the Slido, and I'll give a bit of time for you guys to ask any questions you have. Looks like there's one question there already. I think you touched on this already, but question is, does having self-driving cars change these theories in any way?
So the main way that it can affect things is just basically on the reaction time, because a lot of there's that's why in the speed part, if you just the stopping part, um, is that it basically affects this variable. Everything else is still going to stay the same because the deceleration, there's still like the limitations to how fast you can decelerate. Is a main thing, and then also you still need to it might make a difference, and then like another common thing is like sign where we like locate signs, how big we make them, but I think like that wouldn't really make too much of a difference, except maybe to make things, they are already standardized, so yeah.
Okay.
I guess
Um,
also car
mhm,
following would make a difference, so that's like how close you can follow to another car with reaction times, but still the
okay.
same sort of idea.
This is assuming if you have like human drivers and self-driving cars at the same time, right?
Well, with any sort of thing is that for car following is that you still need time to actually make a difference. So like in the sort of this example, even if you're following a self-driving car, the self-driving car still might need to stop all of a sudden because of something that you have to react to. You still have to react to the car in front of you.
Mhm,
So that's sort of like it'll still be there. And so the reaction time is kind of important, but also like it's not the only. There's two main terms.
I see. Okay. All right. Another question is, how did you originally get interested in the topic of traffic? Have you been able to actually apply these things on a co-op or a similar experience?
So I think traffic has always been something interesting because it's so visible in the world around us. And then I was looking for, because of what academic calendar I'm in, um, I'm able to take for my applied math course, I can take engineering courses. So I was like, oh, let me just take this civil engineering course uh, about this, and it was a lot of fun. And then decided to take another one.
I see. Dang. So it's a civil engineering course.
Yeah.
Is it does it mainly touch on traffic or does it touch on other things as well?
So the CS so Civ 241
Mhm.
is the course code. So it talks about all different transportation. So there's even they talk a bit about airplanes. Unfortunately, they didn't talk about trains.
Mhm.
How am I supposed to be prepared for CS 452 if I don't take courses on trains?
Of course.
Um, but then yeah, so a lot of it was and like how like the geography that we shape roads, like if you're um like what's the maximum like rotation like for a road that's like turning, how well like how sharp you can have turns, how like steep you can have slopes, all that fun stuff too. It's a good time.
My bad. Okay. Uh okay, yeah. And we just have a comment. Really cool to see how much thought goes into making driving and traffic safe, shaping our environment to make our lives safer. Mm,
There's so much too that goes behind the scenes. It's really interesting, all
yeah,
the
for sure.
calculations.
Okay, since we don't have any more questions for now,
Cool.
thanks, Mary, for your talk. I think I learned a lot, and it gave me a good review of CS 350 as well. Okay, okay. Next up, we have Dmytro, who will be talking about blind signatures and their applications. Dmytro,
Cool, thank you. Right, so I'll be talking about blind signatures. They're a thing in real life. You can put a sheet of masking paper on top of a check and certify it without seeing the amount. Digital blind signatures are slightly different. We'll get to that. Let's talk motivation first. Always a good place to start. So let's say you want to run an election or a survey, interchangeable concepts in the end of the day. And so we'll call you a survey authority, let's say. Now, if you wanted to use the results of the survey for anything useful at all, you'd probably want to ensure that at least every physical person votes only once. You would accept votes, but not 2 votes from the same person. And another thing you often want to ensure is that the votes only come from some subset of population of people in the world. Let's say if you're on a WUSA election, you want to ensure at least that the students are Waterloo students, the participants are Waterloo students, and probably more things as well. And so that is one of the requirements for running a useful survey. Let's say a national election is another example. In that case, you would use some proof of citizenship to vet voters. Let's assume that you can do that. That seems like a matter of simple programming in good cases. We won't bother with bad cases. Now, for it to be useful to show to someone, you also need integrity. You shouldn't be able to just make up votes. You shouldn't be able to prevent voters from voting if they are eligible. But we'll just skip that whole issue. It's not the topic of this talk. And you can, there's a paper here. You can look at it. It talks about how to achieve that. It's achievable, nothing really fancy. But the issue that's really interesting is anonymity. And anonymity is not usually actually not granted in surveys and elections, but in some cases you really want it. Otherwise, the survey is useless. If it asks a question such that one of the possible answers would imperil your voters, if you're linked to them, then well, it's not a useful result that you get out of that survey. No one's going to choose that answer. And that one usually relies on trust, but we want it to be trusted. We don't want voters to have to trust that the election authority won't disclose their identities, how they're linked to votes, rather. Okay, so that's what we want. This third part, I'll be talking about pretty much just that. That paper also talks about it, but I'm not going to just direct to the paper. Let's see how it's done. So the most basic voting scheme is something like this, where you take credential and vote, and you just record the vote. Which is blatantly non-anonymous, because you can just log the credential and the vote, and then you know the correspondence. Actually, you have to log some unique identifier in the vote for integrity purposes. So you even can't avoid that line. So this doesn't work for anonymity at all. You can split these things up like here. So you instead, the credential gives you a voter token, and then you vote with the token. That's slightly better, so you can log the token in the vote, and that's not obviously linked to your credential, but nothing prevents you from also logging this, right? So also, this is not trusted. You have to trust that this line is not there. And this, though, gives you the right idea, right? The problem is just this token is the only thing that links the registration and voting. So you just need to disjoin these tokens here and here, like that. So you derive some square token, and then you vote with triangle token. There needs to be some kind of way that these correspond to each other, and the authority has to be able to check that triangle is a valid token, but the authority shouldn't be able to figure out how they're linked. This mapping should be only known to the voter. And you couldn't do that if the voter didn't, if this were not an interactive protocol. The voter gives you some seed, and then you derive from the seed. Another way of phrasing is that the registration is an interactive protocol here. Like all the traffic in it shouldn't be able to give you any knowledge about the triangle, or given triangle shouldn't be able to link it to an instance of this traffic exchange here. Okay, we've reduced sort of anonymity more or less to that, except for one asterisk here. And let's talk about it real briefly. So the only part that's missing at the end of the day is, well, if you vote here, but you do it over a network and you use the public internet for that purpose, then there's another way that you're not anonymous, and that's sort of a non-cryptographical way, which is that your ISP, you're probably behind a NAT, and the authority sees your IP address through which you're natted, and the ISP knows the association between your identity and the mapped address. So if the ISP and the authority collude, then you'd be in trouble. And in practice, that can happen. You know, if you're on campus, then you otherwise is your ISP. So you're only as safe as insofar as you think that they will come after you. Well, we won't talk about that. Let's just say use an onion network. It works fine. These are now disjoined. How secure that is not the topic of this talk, but let's assume we can do that. Okay, let's put that away. So without that, it's all fine. It's secure, provided we can do that actually square and triangle thing. One really boring answer would be, well, we already know how to do that in a sense. You know, if Monero or CryptoNote, right? If that's really anonymous, then you can just registration. And registration, you deposit Monero, and then voting is by depositing Monero to wallets corresponding to each of the options. And if that's anonymous and you have anonymity, it's not really practical because, you know, it costs money, but you can devise a protocol based on the same CryptoNote paper that does this. It's fine. But that's kind of a boring answer because it's just using this pretty complex system that you don't see into. So we'll just go into how it actually works. Not Monero, but how you could do this, achieve the same result. A really obvious way, if you just look at what you're required, is use oblivious transfer, because it kind of, so oblivious transfer is a little known cryptographic concept, I think, kind of little known, that pretty much exactly maps what we're trying to do here. It says, you know, you have n secrets, the authority, and it gives exactly one to a voter at registration, which is this voter token. And the authority doesn't know which one it gave. So this promise kind of seems to exactly be what we want. And this is how I implemented this actually at the beginning, using, by this I mean the whole voting scheme. Because my interest in this actually is fueled by the fact that I actually want to create such a survey system. So I actually implemented these things. And there is this paper which is a really good oblivious transfer scheme in my opinion. And you can have it be on super singular isogeny, so quantum safe, really cool. But there are problems with that. Kind of a trivial problem, not a trivial problem, but a less significant problem is that oblivious transfer requires necessarily O of n network traffic to pass through the connection, because if you didn't, like, each of the secrets has to plausibly have been the one that the voter received. So you have to send basically all of them, you know, transformed in some form, in some sort of way. And collisions are disastrous in this case, because if some voter receives the same token as another one, then they can't both vote. So you need this, for this n to be much larger than the number of voters. And so this kind of dooms you. It's going to be very slow and wasteful. But you could kind of work through that. That's fine. You don't need voting to be super fast, maybe. But a much more serious problem is that you can trivially cheat. The authority can cheat by just presenting different secrets to different voters based on their credential. Like the same secret, like all of the n secrets are actually one secret which maps to the voter. And the voter wouldn't be able to check that. So that just doesn't work at all. Now, blind signatures is the topic of the talk, so you know, it's about time I came to that. And they're actually really right for this purpose. When I found them, I was very excited, and that's why I'm sharing this actually. I think they're really cool. So the setting is this: the voter has a message, the authority has a private and a public key here. And a blind signature scheme gives you that at the end of, you know, it's an interactive protocol. At the end of the interaction, voter has a signature for that message, a valid signature. And the authority, when it sees that message with a signature later, cannot link it to this instance of this interactive protocol. By cannot, I mean it gains negligible advantage over like a uniformly random guess, etc. That's like formally, but essentially that. And so what I mean here then is that in particular it doesn't see the message. Because if it saw the message, then of course it could link these two things. And if you have a scheme that works like that, then this is fine, right? You just voter picks like a random message, gets it blindly signed. The authority doesn't see the message. And then at the recording time, it presents the message with a signature, and the authority knows that this voter had presented some credential that caused the authority to emit this signature. So this works provided you have a blind signature scheme. Okay, well, how would such a scheme work? Let's consider a really simple example. RSA. I won't recall RSA because we don't have much time, but I will kind of recall. So, you know, we have n, which is the product of two primes. You have exponents c and d. Only e is in the public key, and they are inverse transformations. This is like e and d, right? So e is the inverse of d in the sense that if you bring something to power e, then to power d modulo n, then you get the same thing back in the end. And it's infeasible to find d given only the public key. That's the gist. And because d is a unique inverse of e, you have a really natural encryption signing scheme where, you know, you when you encrypt, you just map through e, which is public, and you know that only the person who knows d can get back the message. And so that's only the key owner, which is in this yellow box, can use d at all. And the signing is the opposite process. You invoke e on the signature, and you know that if you get back the same message, then it had to be mapped through d, which only the key owner knows. This is a really natural way to do this. Okay, and RSA also has another property, it's homomorphic, which means that product of you know, ciphertext and ciphertext of product and signatures have the same property. And this is why the scheme works right here. So you can you pick some random offset, you bring to power e, you shift byte, then you sign this shifted message, and then you unshift the signature by R inverse. And if you check the algebra, you see that this works. S is the signature for M. And intuitively, what happens is, you know, you could sign M directly, or you can sign the shifted thing, and then unshift. And this is the same thing, but from the red arrow, you can't know the blue arrows. You don't see how these are related, unless you know the yellow arrows, which only the voter does. That's the idea. This is secure, so there's a problem with this, right? This is not a very good blind signature scheme. And the reason is that, well, recall that the signature scheme in the first place is secure by definition. If you can come up with a bunch of messages, as many as you want, you get them signed, and then you have to, if you can forge a signature for a message you didn't get signed, then it's insecure. Well, you did exactly that right now, right? There's an attack on the RSA signature scheme because you signed only M prime, but you know the signature for N now. There's a forgery, and this is why this signature scheme actually is not secure. Even the non-blind version of RSA without padding is not secure. And then the question is, is this fixable, right? It's kind of fixable because you can't just arbitrarily forge signature for any message. You have to know the decryption of this thing here in order to be able to forge the signature. And you did by construction in the case that we just saw. You shifted by RE, so you know the decryption is R. And generally, you don't know this. So you can't really control which messages you forge signatures for. You can maybe fix it by requiring M to be small, so that when you randomly shift it, it's not going to be small, almost definitely. But this is suspect because, you know, there are coppersmith attacks. The coppersmith attacks is, you know, if you have small roots anywhere that involves RSA, then you might be in trouble. You probably don't want to rely on the smallness of anything. You can fix that, but anyway, it's a bad scheme. Okay, you don't want to use this. Can you use better schemes with that are also blind? Yes, definitely. It's more complicated. I don't really cover it in detail, but any signature scheme on a group, usually based on the Schnorr construction. For example, EDDSA is a really great general signature scheme. It's the one you want if you do signatures at all. That scheme and any other Schnorr construction can be made blind by this transformation here. The same idea, you shift, then you unshift, then you unshift. If you remove the green lines, then you get just the ordinary Schnorr signature. So it's a real natural transformation. It's really good. There are also schemes that don't have a non-blind analog. They're purpose-made to be blind, like Kamenny-Schlesianska. But these schemes have received less scrutiny just because they're less commonly used. So I would use this one personally. But none of these are quantum safe, by the way, right? These are pairings-based. This is group-based, and quantum computers break both of those. Well, pairings kind of is group-based, but anyway, these are not quantum safe. Can you have a quantum safe scheme? No, not really, not practically, I think. So there has been definitely research into that, but I asked an expert in the field, is there one? And he said that you might not want to rely on anything like that right now. And here's a paper from 2020, very recent survey paper that says, seems like there isn't anything really reliable in the field right now. It has received much scrutiny. So not really. Okay, but you might say, can you have a MAC, right? A blind MAC key? Because in what I just showed you, kind of didn't need for it to be a signature because the authority signs it, then the authority looks at the signature, right? So it could just be a MAC, a symmetric scheme. And MACs are quantum safe, right, in general. So would that fix it? And it turns out that actually blind MAC schemes don't exist. Kind of a surprise. Usually things aren't that categorical in cryptography, but it's true. And the reason, well, it's in this paper, but the fundamental reason is that if you don't see the key, if you don't have a public key to check what you get from the authority with, the authority can again just use different private keys for different voters based keyed on their credential. And then it can distinguish which voter it is by checking for which key the map works. The intuition why this it's not possible. So you kind of are stuck in that pre-quantum state. But there's a lot of literature there, and maybe we'll have a post-quantum scheme soon that has received good scrutiny. But yeah, that's more or less it. That's the overview of what I make the state of the art. And I'm happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Dmytro. So let's take a look at the questions we have right now. Okay. One question is, what technical applicable experience do you have doing this? Is it like, do you have technical experience doing this, or is it just out of pure interest in learning for the sake of it?
I mean, you can say it's out of pure interest. I mean, I did actually want to build software that practically accomplishes these things, although it's not release quality by any means. But my practical experience not through co-ops. I didn't do co-ops in security. I kind of wanted to, but didn't work out. Like didn't have offers I liked. But I am probably going to study cryptography in grad school. That's my goal. I really like mathematical cryptography, and yeah, it makes me tick. I do CTFs. This is my main interaction with cryptography, I guess, and I really enjoy those too.
I see. And I guess that follows up into one of the other questions we have. If I want to understand cryptography better, how can I get started?
So there's a subreddit called r/crypto, which is not about cryptocurrency, but about cryptography. They have a wiki, and the wiki tells you more or less how to do that. I agree with the advice given there, for what it's worth. And the gist of the advice, though, is that there are pretty good books. I like Cryptography Engineering something by Schneier. I can mention, I can put it in the chat after I finish. I like CryptoPals. It's not the best thing ever, I think, but it's hands-on, right? So it gives you things that you can break. It doesn't grade you on breaking them, but I still found it engaging, and I did that. I liked it. That's a pretty good way. CDFs are a great way also. Actually, maybe the best way, because that's how I got into it personally. I just did CDFs. But then I found that I like crypto, best of everything on CDFs, and then I did a lot of crypto.
Sorry, can you explain what a CTF is?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just assumed. CDF is a cybersecurity competition where you basically solve challenges, and the challenges try to emulate systems that you can break. Kind of. So you kind of are doing offensive security simulated.
I see. Okay. All right. Let's see. What are some difficulties in implementing blind signatures?
Difficulties? Well, I mean, one thing you might say is that in general, everything that isn't like extremely well studied and done 100 times over, you have to be careful because you might do something that renders it totally broken. Like, for example, the oblivious transfer scheme. Like if you do everything but you forget one check, then you can break it very easily.
Right.
And unless this is like an extremely well-known thing which has many implementations that you can sort of crib from, then there's a pretty good chance to forget something. That's like a general cryptography thing, I think. Don't
Okay.
think there's anything like intrinsic to blind signatures that's difficult.
Right. I see. I see. And are there any real-world applications using this practice right now?
Well, I'm given to understand that cryptocurrencies, a lot of like cryptography and cryptocurrencies is things that I'm only vaguely aware of. Like I know Monero does like ring signatures for its anonymity, and I'm only vaguely familiar with them, so I don't really know, I would say. I don't know anything outside of that, right? Like pretty much they're purpose built for this kind of thing where you have like anonymous election, anonymous reputation. There's paper on anonymous reputation that uses blind signatures. I can link that one too. But all of these things are kind of in the realm of, like cryptocurrency people, you can say. Because you wouldn't run a real world election on the computer system, right? That'd be very stupid. But like a lot of what cryptocurrency enthusiasts are interested in is this kind of thing, how can you trustlessly do X, like voting and surveys and reputation, etc. And that's probably where all of the use is.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Could you please share some of those resources in the chat for people who are interested?
Yes, absolutely. I'll link the things in my presentation. Also, I mean I can just link my slides, honestly.
Okay, yeah, that works
have all
too.
these things. I'll do both.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Okay, and we got Crypto Pals in the chat. Thank you, Lofty Squash and Callum. Yeah. So right now we have had 2 speakers already, and we're going to take a quick break before we move on to the next ones. Yeah, so we'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, guys, we are back. And next up, we have Jerry and Christian, who is our contest programming duo, and they'll be talking about recursion and Catalan numbers. Go ahead, Jerry and Christian.
All right, perfect. So we'll be talking about recursion with the Catalan numbers.
And an introduction to competitive programming.
So what is competitive programming? Competitive programming is a mind sport, which is usually held over the internet, involving participants trying to solve different computing problems. These problems vary from different data structures and algorithms. Competitive programming is also a great way for programmers to demonstrate their coding skills. Most programming contests take place on online judges. That brings us to the question, what are they? So they are systems designed for the reliable evaluation of algorithm source code submitted by users. Some well-known examples are Codeforces, LeetCode, and Dmytro. Now, similar to the game of chess, these online judges will give you a rating based off of the ELO system. In order to get a rating, you need to participate in contests. So the higher rating you have, the better.
But why should we learn competitive programming? Well, keep this question in mind, because by the end of the presentation, we'll answer this question. Now we'll move on to recursion with the Catalan numbers.
So first off, we'll talk about sequences and series and how they relate to the Catalan numbers. So there are many examples of infinite sequences and series. So we have the natural numbers, the arithmetic sequence, the geometric sequence, and the well-known Fibonacci sequence. So notice that each of these sequences has a pattern or construction. The Catalan numbers is also an infinite series, and we will attempt to find it.
So how do we find the series? Let's look at a motivation for the Catalan numbers. The problem is that there are two n people seated on a circular table, and we want to find the number of ways that every person simultaneously shakes hands with one other person, such that no two people cross arms. Well, to solve this, we can just construct a table as follows, where on the left side we have n, and on the right side we have the number of ways. Notice that these represent the first few Catalan numbers. Here is a visual representation for n equals to 4, and we notice that there are 14 total ways.
So why recursion? Let an represent the nth term of a sequence. Now, some of these sequences can be trivially represented. So if we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, an is equal to n. Or if we have 2, 5, 8, and 11, an is equal to 3n minus 1. Or if we have 6, 18, 54, 162, an is equal to 2 times 3 to the n. So other sequences like the Fibonacci sequence and the Catalan numbers are much harder to represent. So we can use recursion to help us out. So recursion is a process in which a function or sequence calls itself again. This is based on the idea of structural or strong induction, the property that if we know the value of a0, a1, all the way to an minus 1, which is the first n minus 1 terms, we can find the nth term. So for example, in the Fibonacci sequence, the recursive sequence is an is equal to an minus 1 plus an minus 2. This means that we can find the nth term given the n minus first and n minus second terms.
So how do we do this for the Catalan numbers? Let's let Cn represent the nth Catalan number and let A and B be the first pair of people that shake hands. After this happens, the circle will be split into two sides, and if one side of the circle has k pairs, the other side will have n minus 1 minus k pairs. And the total number of ways for this configuration is just ck times cn minus 1 minus k. And Cn is the sum of all these combinations, which gives us our recursive formula shown below. Here is the recursive formula for the Catalan numbers shown again, and an example for C of 3 as an illustration.
So here's the Catalan recursion code, which is written in C++. So here we have a function called Catalan, which takes in an integer n. And the base case is simply if n is less than or equal to 1, we just return 1. Then we have a variable called result, which is the summation of the Catalan numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
Harry isn't.
Oh, I'm not frozen. Yeah. This is Christian's part, but I don't even think I can move on because this is Christian's slide. So
Okay. All right. This is Christian's slide. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Let's wait for him to come back online.
Okay.
Okay.
So, all right, thanks, Yanni. So here's a Catalan recursion code. So we have a function called Catalan, which takes in an integer n. And the base case is simply if n is less than or equal to 1, we return 1. Then we have a result. We have a variable called result, and that's just a summation of the Catalan numbers. So now we have that result plus equals Catalan I times Catalan n minus 1 minus I. This is representative of the mathematical formula, and then we just return the result, which is the nth Catalan number.
Let's look at some more problems that showcase the Catalan numbers. How many ways are there to balance n pairs of parentheses such that each left parenthesis has a matching right parenthesis? An example is shown below. Notice that this is equal to the number of handshakes that don't cross arms. To understand this, let's choose a starting point S and give each person a left bracket or right bracket, such that each handshake corresponds to a pair of left bracket and right bracket. And the number of ways is just the nth Catalan number, C of n. Here's a visualization for n equals to 3.
So next, we'll talk about the mountain range problem. So the problem statement is, how many mountain ranges can be formed with n upstrokes and n downstrokes that stay above the original line? This is shown below. So the solution is actually equal to the number of balanced parentheses. So if we let the forward slash be +1 and the backslash be -1, the number of ways that don't cross the original line, or the number of balanced parentheses, are the configurations in which the sum is never less than 0. Otherwise, this will cross the line. So the number of ways is just the nth Catalan number Cn. And this is also similar to a problem called Bertrand's ballot problem. Here's the transformation solution shown below. And here is a visualization for when n is equal to 3, and this is just the nth Catalan number, so there are 5 ways.
Another problem is that in an n by n grid, we want to find the number of paths of length 2n that go from the upper left to lower right corner that don't go below the long diagonal. An example is shown here, where we want to go from A to B, and a valid path is shown. This is actually equal to the number of mountain ranges. The simplest way to understand this is to just rotate the grid 45 degrees counterclockwise and notice a bijection and one-to-one correspondence. And the number of ways is just the nth Catalan number Cn. Here's an illustration where when we rotate the grid, we see that this is just the mountain range problem. We also might want to know how fast our recursive program runs. To do this, let's let T of n represent the time complexity for finding the nth Catalan number. And we know since C of n is a recursive formula, we can relate this to T of n as well. And by telescoping, we notice that T of n is at least exponential since it's greater than or equal to O2 of n. We want to know if there's a way to optimize this recursive algorithm.
So there is a way to optimize this recursive algorithm by resolving any overlapping subsequences. So consider the formula for finding the 6th Catalan number. Notice that C6 needs you to calculate C3, but so does C5 and C4. So this means that we have to calculate C3 more than once. So that's very inefficient. So instead of calculating it multiple times, we can memoize the state for future use. And this means that we only have to calculate each state once. And you can note that this idea is almost the same as tabulating or memoizing the Fibonacci sequence. So if we let dp of I represent the ith Catalan number, we only need to calculate each Catalan number once and then save that value. So after that, we would just use the save value instead of recalculating. And since we only have to calculate each Catalan number once, we can just construct the Catalan numbers iteratively with nested loops. So you can notice that there are n levels to this, C0 to Cn minus 1, and each term is the sum of at most n terms. So now T of n is less than or equal to n times n, and now we have order n squared time. And here is the Catalan DP code. We have a function called Catalan, and that takes in an integer n. So now we construct a DP table of space n plus 1. The base case is where we set dp0 equal to dp1, and we set all of that equal to 1. Then for every iteration from j to I, we set dp of I back to 0, and we calculate dp of I plus equals dpj times dpi minus 1 minus j. This means that we calculate each state once, and this is also representative of the mathematical formula. And we simply return dp of n, which is the nth Catalan number.
Can we speed this up even further? It turns out that we can't, but to do this, we need to find and prove an explicit closed formula for C of n. Well, one solution is to use a generating function. Let's let the generating function C of x equal to the summation of ck times x to the k, where the coefficient of the term x to the k is the kth Catalan number. We notice that we can relate c of x to c0 and cx squared, and we can use a quadratic formula to find c of x in terms of x. And from the extended binomial expansion of 1 minus 4x to the power of 1/2 and some more simplification, we can get that c of n is equal to 1 over n plus 1 of 2n choose n. Another much easier proof is using a trick called Andre's reflection method. Let's go back to our diagonal avoiding paths problem. We can just count the total number of paths subtracted by the number of bad paths. And for each bad path, we can reflect it, starting at the first time it crosses the diagonal. An example is shown on the next slide, where we're going from A to B, and this bad path is shown that crosses the diagonal at first at the point M. After we reflect the path will end up at C instead of B. This table shows this as well. Notice that after we flip it, there will be n minus 1 moves right and n plus 1 moves down, which means that we will always end up at C instead of B. And this is true for every bad path. So the number of bad paths is just the number of paths through an n minus 1 by n plus 1 grid. Since the total number of paths through an n by n grid is 2n choose n, and the number of paths through an n minus 1 by n plus 1 grid is just 2n choose n plus 1, we can find c of n by just subtracting the two, and we get our same formula as before. Notice that since c of n can be found with just a binomial expansion, t of n is just O of n. And the closed form formula for the Catalan numbers is also shown here, as well as an example for c of 3. Here's a code for finding the nth Catalan number. Notice that since we're only doing multiplication and division, we only need to loop and do that.
So what are some interesting results that can be formed from the Catalan numbers? So first, we'll talk about a geometric result. So consider a circle shown below with center O. Assume that the circle has radius r and capital RP is equal to 1. We can find QP since QP is equal to r minus OQ, and now OQ is equal to the root of r squared minus 1. Then QP is equal to r minus the root of r squared minus 1. So we can get some interesting results, and we are actually able to generate the Catalan numbers if we let r equal 5 times 10 to the power of k. So if we let r equal 5 times 10 to the power of 6, we get that QP is equal to this big decimal number, which contains the first 25 Catalan numbers. Catalan's triangle is also an interesting way to generate the nth Catalan number, with similarly interesting results. So the ends of each row of this triangle is just the nth Catalan number.
The Catalan numbers also have some interesting properties in graph theory. For example, a full binary tree is a type of graph where there are either 2 or 0 edges going down from each node in the previous level, and the number of full binary trees with n internal nodes is exactly Cn. An example is shown for n equals to 3. Also, the number of plain-rooted trees or unlabeled binary trees with n edges is also C of n. Here's an example for n equals to 3. Finally, the Catalan numbers create very interesting properties in certain matrices. In fact, in a Hankel matrix of size n by n, whose entry ij is populated with the Catalan number ci plus j minus 2, the determinant is 1, regardless of the value of n, as shown below.
So here are some other competitive programming problems that use Catalan numbers. Some of these problems are on some very well-known judges, such as CodeChef, Spoj, UVA, and Codeforces. So there may be many other problems that use Catalan numbers, and some are yet to be found, maybe even by us. So the Catalan numbers relate to many other fields of study, and by learning one sequence, we can learn about many interesting properties and problems.
And this really takes us back to the question of why learn competitive programming, because competitive programming helps us uncover these transformations and solutions to these hard problems. As they improve your logic, they make you focus and faster, and they help you solve these complicated problems. And as you practice, you fail, succeed, and learn how to solve these problems, as well as learn how to write fast and efficient code. In fact, competitive programming may also help with the job searching process because of technical or coding interviews. And during these technical interviews, the same principles as these computing contests apply. You have to have solid understanding of computing logic, you must be focused and aware of time, and you need the ability to solve difficult problems on the spot. And there are sites like LeetCode that are made specifically for this kind of purpose. In essence, competitive programming is just a different way of thinking that can help your programs and the world run a little bit faster.
So here's some resources to help everyone get started with competitive programming. The first resource is Competitive Programming Handbook, which is one of my favorite resources, and I actually keep it open while I'm writing contests. The second resource is a Codeforces blog written by a user, which compiled a lot of competitive programming resources into it. And finally, the last resource is from a very well-known international competitive programmer who posts his tutorials on YouTube. And here are our references for this presentation. And finally, we have the most important slide to help you understand recursion and the Catalan numbers.
Thanks, Christian and Jerry. Let's go on to the question portion. All right. So do you guys compete in competitions? If you do, are there any fond memories you have of competing?
Yeah, definitely. There were a few contests that I actually wrote in person while I was in high school, and those were a lot of fun because you got to like network and like talk to other people from other schools that did it as well. And that was really cool because you like might see them online, but then you'd also see them in person. That was always a fun experience.
And also you get to look at a lot of hard problems, and as you solve them, you get better. And it's really fun to just compete with other people as well as, solving these problems and learning from them.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Also, when did you guys start programming competitively, and what about it specifically caught your attention?
So I personally started competitive programming in the beginning of grade 11. And it was basically my computer science teacher who told me about one of these online judges because I was looking for some practice problems to get better. And he said, hey, you can go on this website and just practice a ton of problems. And then once I started doing them in class, I actually liked it so much that I started doing it in my spare time. And here I am.
Awesome. What about you, Jerry?
I actually started programming in the summer of grade 9. Kind of like how Chris, kind of same thing with my CS teacher talking to me about what competitive programming was. And as I did these Dmytro contests, that was a site that I went on to start, and then I did these contests and problems, and they became really fun. And as I kept doing it, I kept meeting new people and learning about even more problems, and that was what piqued my interest in doing competitive programming.
Awesome. And also, what is your favorite competitive programming question you've done? Or if you don't have a favorite question, what's your favorite class of problems?
For me, I'd say my favorite class is probably dynamic programming or graph theory. And this is just because they're two very general topics. However, there's a lot of intersection between the two. There's lots of problems that actually combine the two. Doing those problems is a lot of fun because it combines two things.
Yeah, same with me. My favorite type of problem would have to be dynamic programming because it needs, first of all, it needs a lot of technical background to solve. And then you also need to find a state or something that an intuition that you can work off of. And it's really cool once you find it because it gives you an eureka moment where you realize how to solve it and you can optimize the recursive formula and you can get it much faster than other people.
Makes sense. And we have one last question for you, which is, what is your favorite Catalan number?
Definitely 42 because it is the meaning of life.
Of course, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
You too, Christian?
Sure. I actually don't even have an answer for that. I've never thought of that.
I see. If you were to have a favorite, though, which one would it be?
The first one, I guess. N equals 1.
All right. Yeah, 1 is a pretty solid number. I agree. All right, so that's all the questions we got for now. Thank you, Jerry and Christian. We really appreciate your presentation. And next up, we have Neil, who will be talking about automatic differentiation.
Hey everyone, I'm Neil. I'm a 3B mechatronics student, and I'll be talking about automatic differentiation. If you'd like to follow along, my slides are on the internet at this URL, so you can take a look there. And I also have my slide numbers. If you want to ask a question or refer to a slide, just you can put the number in there. And the URL will be at the top left if you want to come back to it. So what's the motivation here? And so often when you're writing code, you have to find, or not often, sometimes you have to find you have to calculate the derivative of some arbitrary function. So function, I mean like a function in code, while you're calculating the function. And by derivative, I mean the value of the derivative, not the expression itself, just like a numerical. As an example, in machine learning, when you have when you're doing gradient descent, you have to minimize the loss function. As an aside, you have some neural network or some other model, and it has some associated loss function. This loss function represents how much, how big is the error in your model, how close it is to reality. And your goal is to minimize this function. So you vary the parameters. Now you could try brute force, increase one, decrease the other, and kind of go back and forth. But if you have n parameters, that ends up being 3 to the n, which is obviously not very efficient. And so what you can do is, if you go back to calculus, we know that if you go along the direction of the negative derivative, that's where the function decreases the fastest. And so we need to calculate the derivative of the function. This function is arbitrary, so we can't just do it by hand. We can, but it's very slow. It's a lot of work. And so the technique we can use is automatic differentiation. And this is what TensorFlow and PyTorch and all other machine learning frameworks use to do their training. And so there are 2 alternatives I want to talk about before I get into why this is the best one. The first one, we can do numeric differentiation. So this is basically following from the definition derivative from Calc 1. You take function, you add a small value, subtract previous value and divide it by that small value. You can take limit h equals 0. And so if you want to compute this, you can't do h equals 0 because it's division by 0. So you pick a very small h. Problem is, you get a lot of rounding errors because of floating point math. And so let's say your function is x squared. You're doing this one operation right here with the floating point number. So you're gonna have a lot of error there. Subtract, some more error, and divide, that's more error. So this just the errors are gonna propagate and you won't get a good accurate value. Or the alternative is symbolic differentiation. And here you basically manipulate the expression itself and you apply the rules of differentiation. So this is kind of what, if you go to Wolfram Alpha and type in, find derivative of something, that's what it does for you. The problem is you have to take your code and turn it into a single expression, like kind of a mathematical expression. And so if you have like loops or you have if statements or kind of anything like control flow related, the system can't really do anything about it. It has to be a single expression. And you can imagine it when you're writing machine learning, you don't have a single expression, you have some code. And so the solution is automatic differentiation. So to start, I'll do a little demo to show kind of how this kind of works about the top, and then afterwards I'll go into how it works. And so here I have a polynomial, just x squared plus 5x plus 1. So the star means exponentiation. And so I want to find the derivative of this function at 2. The derivative is 2x plus 5. So if I want to find the regular value, I'd pass in 2 when I call the function. Here, to make it calculate derivative, I have a custom thing called AD. I'll explain what it does later. And I pass in the 2 to the AD, and then you pass that into the F. It wraps it around and tells us to do that. And if I run it, I get 2 values back. I get the regular 15, which makes sense, right? 2 squared plus 5 times 2 is 1 is 15. And then I also get 9. That's just 2 times 2 plus 5, which is 9. So I didn't do any extra code. I just put this AD part in and automatically found the correct derivative for me. And so that was pretty simple. Let's do something more complicated. So I have this sine function with plus and multiplication. It's pretty complicated. And I also went and calculated the derivative by hand, like using Wolfram Alpha. So just to verify it's the same value. And if I run these two, I'll comment this out for now. Oops. So if I hit run here, as you can see, it found this derivative, 1.5 whatever. And if I do it by hand, it's the exact same value. So it's not approximation, it's as if you did it by hand. You get the exact same number. So it implies that kind of it's actually doing the same operations you would do if you found the derivative by hand. Pretty neat, I think. When I first wrote this, I was blown away. Even though I wrote the code, I was blown away that it actually worked. Okay, so that's the demo. So how does this actually work under the hood? What is it doing to make this work? That's the code again. So the core idea is chain rule. So I'll go in a little more detail there. So let's use this example to understand how it works. So we want to find dg dx, right? And So to simplify this is pretty complicated. Simplify. Let's take some of these intermediate variables or values and put them into variables. So let's take the x plus x, put it into a. So again, all I've done is taken this x plus x right here and replace it with a, and then made it a. This a equals x plus x. So we can do that. Let's do it again with a times x. Let's put that into a variable called b. Same idea. B equals a times x. And then finally, let's do this b to the power of 3 and put it into c. So again, c equals b times 3, b to the power of 3, sorry. Just to make it a little bit easier to handle. Now, the derivative here of g with respect to x is pretty obvious, right? It's just cos c because derivative sign is c. But c is also a function of x. So we have to apply the chain rule and multiply that by dc dx. Okay, so that's what I was saying, the chain rule back before. Now, what's the derivative of dc dx? Well, that's just derivative of c. Let's reduce the exponent by 1, move it over here. So you got 3 times b squared. And since it's b is a function of x, sorry, you have to take the derivative again. So db dx. Okay, what's the derivative of db dx? Well, that's just multiplication rule. So the first value times the derivative second plus second times derivative first. And finally, you need dA dx, and dA dx is just dx dx plus dx dx right here. Pretty straightforward. And if you look at the order of the original function and our derivatives, the same order, right? Like when we calculate a, we can use a to calculate b and b to calculate c, and then c calculate the final value. Same thing here. We can use dA dx. We can calculate dA dx first, use that to calculate dB dx, then use dB dx to calculate dC dx, and then use dC dx to calculate dG dx. And so that sort of hints at the idea that we can actually kind of follow the same order before in the calculating the values and calculate the derivative at the same time. That's actually exactly what we're going to do. So let's go back to the code for a minute. And we called g with AD2, right? So let's replace all the x's with AD2. So that's just, all I did was I passed this value into x here and replace this x, this x, this x with the special AD2 value, and then just got rid of the def because we're just calling the function. The next question is, what is this AD, right? I made this AD, what does it actually do? And it's just a Python class with 2 values. So I'm just storing the x value, which is the actual value, and I'm storing dx, which is the derivative, because I'm going to pass that along when I do more computations. So you can just think of it as a pair of 2 values to keep track of 2 different values. And so I know if you notice the default is 1, so which makes sense, right? Because the derivative of x is just 1, dx dx, and so I'm going to put that here. That's what's actually happening. It's a pair of 2 and 1, basically, 2 1 2 1. And in Python, you can actually take this plus, times, and multiplication sign, and you can tell Python, instead of using the built-in one, use the one I've made myself. So I made a custom version of add, multiply, and power and sign that does the derivative combination. And so I'm saying, let's use that instead. So that's what I did right here. So it says, instead of plus, it does AD add, which is my custom version, and passes those 2 values in. AD mult, passes 2 values, and so on. And so come back, what we're saying is, doing computations, combine both the value and the derivative using the chain rule. And so when I went back here, what does that mean? Well, that means that when we calculate a equals x plus x, we should also calculate dA dx equals dx plus dx. When we calculate b equals a times x, let's calculate dB dx. And we can, right? Because dB dx just requires a, it requires dx dx, and it requires dA dx. And we'll have that, right? Because when we calculate a, we'll already have done dA dx. Same thing with c. When we're calculating c, let's also calculate dc dx. And dc dx requires b and dB dx, and we've done that already in the previous step. And so on. And so you can imagine this line right here, this line right here, being run at the same time as a. And then this line right here is run at the same time as b, so on. And so going back to this code right here, I got rid of the AD dot, but you can imagine the same thing here, the AD add function. You can imagine that the add function will be doing this stuff. So that when you call add, it's going to do this line right here, it's also going to do this line right here. When I call mult, the multiply function, it's going to do this line right here. But it's also going to do this line right here, which is the derivative calculation for multiplication. And the same thing for power and sign. So this is the definition of add. What does add do? Well, add says you're adding two values. How do you add the values? You just add them together. And what's the if you have addition operation, what's the derivative of the two? Well, it's just sum of the two derivatives, right? If you have x plus x, the derivative of x plus x is you take the derivative left hand side, derivative right hand side, and add them together. So pretty straightforward. So you just say add the values, add the derivatives, and then return them in a pair. So here, if we do that, this was the thing we had before. We just say add, AD is this 2 plus 2, 1 plus 1, and that's just 4 and 2. And that's correct, right? If you have x plus x and with x equals 2, the value is 4 and the derivative is 2. Now we can bring that into the multiply, bring it in. Multiply, same idea. If you're multiplying two values together, you multiply the x values, and then you apply for a derivative, you apply the multiplication rule. It's the first times the derivative of the second, plus the second times the derivative of the first. You return those two, and same thing. So here, we had 4, 4, 2, and 2, 1. The values are just 4 times 2. The derivative is first value times the second derivative, so 4 times 1, and the derivative, and it's second value times the derivative of the first one, 2 times 2. That's 8. And x plus x times x does have derivative 8, so that works correctly. And so you bring that in. Power, same thing. Again, the actual value is just applying the power function. Derivative, you decrease the exponent by 1, multiply by the old exponent, and then again you have these chain rules. You have to multiply by the derivative of a, because a could be a complicated non-constant. Same thing. We apply, decrease the exponent by 1, multiply old exponent, and you apply chain rule here. Is this right here? Bring that in. Sign, exact same thing. Calculate the values. I'm doing math.sign because I want to do actual sign, not my custom version. And derivative is you calculate cos. This derivative of sign is cos, and then you have to apply chain ruler here. So you have chain ruler here, and that's that. And so, if you recall, at the very starting, whoops, I mentioned that the symbolic differentiation cannot handle loops, but the automatic differentiation can. And so I want to give a small demo of that. I think this is very cool. So let's get rid of all this. Actually, let's do it. So I've written a power function, and so the power of x then, it's pretty simple. You have a result variable called prod, say for I and n, to multiply the product by x and return the product. So this is how you'd implement power, and I want to find the derivative of this, and so I call power with I turn this into a special AD object. So I want to with respect to this variable right here, and I run it, and I get 6, and that is correct, right? X squared derivative of x squared is 2x, and 2x at 3 is 6. So I've written a function that has has for loops, and it can still find the derivative because again we overloaded this times operator here, so it does the tracking along the way. So no special work required. And so I guess other notes is that I mentioned at starting that this is used for gradient descent. And if you're curious, I've implemented linear regression using gradient descent right here. You can look at this URL and take a look at the code, how I do it. Another note is that since we're just adding an extra operation along the way, calculating the derivative is just as fast asymptotically as calculating f of x. It's just extra operation for each one. There's no asymptotic extra overhead. And just implements in PyTorch and TensorFlow using these packages. So AutoGrad and TF Gradient Tape are the ones implemented. Take a slightly different approach, but it's same core idea. And I think that's everything.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Let's refer to the questions. All right. So one question is, are there any CS courses at Waterloo that can help us understand what goes on under the hood in depth? Other than calc, I'm assuming, is what they're asking.
I can't think of anything particular.
Hmm.
I think the machine learning courses might look into it. They might talk about it,
Mhm.
but I haven't taken them, so I'm not sure. There are a few good articles online as well that you could look. If you look up automatic differentiation, there's a lot of good articles that explain.
I see.
That's basically how I learned it.
So were you like interested in ML first and then decide to look more into automatic differentiation? Is that how you got into this topic?
No, not at all. Actually, it's kind of funny. I learned about automatic differentiation first
Mhm.
because I thought it was just a kind of a new technique, automatic. Like I have read some code, no extra work, and automatically get derivative. I thought that was pretty cool.
Hmm.
And then I was looking up applications because I was like, if I'm gonna go talk about this, I should probably have some applications in mind. And so I googled applications and learned about it afterwards. So I
Right.
went the opposite approach of what someone would take, but I just appreciate it because it's such an elegant technique.
Yeah, it is pretty nice actually. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. By the way, you can ask questions in the chat as well. That is also an option. We got someone commending you, Neil. They're saying, Neil, you're a pretty cool guy. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you for the compliment.
And okay, I guess that's all the questions we have for now. Why don't we get all the speakers up right now and we will ask any final questions we have for all the speakers. So can all the speakers turn on their video, please? Hello, everyone. Okay. So we're just going to ask questions to everyone. First of all, I got a question that says, Mary, what do you think about traffic in Toronto?
Like, there's some interesting, like the Gardner is a really interesting like highway. The fact that it's elevated and the fact that like it's like kind of crumbling, but
Mhm.
like I have never driven in like downtown Toronto, and I don't think I ever will. So condition too aggressive too.
What do you think is the like best place for traffic?
So like one thing that's I really like like rural roads are really nice. So you just feel like you just to drive they're really nice. But in terms of then like the urban planning of the roads themselves, Waterloo's actually doing pretty well with all the roundabouts and stuff. But like the Waterloo, I think has some weird like on ramps and off ramps to highways, so I think that counts against them. So I'm really not sure where my favorite spot is, but every place has its fun parts.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. All right. Another question we have is, Christian and Jerry, are there any upcoming competitions that you're attending or looking forward to?
Yeah, so there's like some like Google competitions called Kickstart, and they have like various rounds like throughout the year, and like you can like join any round without like doing the other ones. So I usually like do those, and then another site called Code Forces, like they have like contests going on like every week. So I'll like when I have time, I'll try and do some of those.
Yeah, just like Christian, there are many places like Code Forces or also Dmytro and LeetCode that have like periodic contests, and that we do them whenever we have time, and they also give you a ranking, which is pretty cool. So we could do those whenever.
See. Here's one general question for all the speakers. Where can we find your social medias and how can we connect with you after AltTab? I guess speakers, can you share your socials in the chat, or actually we'll go one by one. Mary, where can we find you?
Facebook.
All right.
And with a last name like Sybersma, it's not exactly hard to find.
Okay. All right. Facebook. Generally.
And I guess email, yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Can you share those in the chat? And we will be sharing these socials and the speakers' presentations on our Discord mainly. We might put it on other platforms, but join our Discord here. Let me give you guys the link. 1 sec.
I guess I also on Discord as Suber.
Suber. That's sick. Here is our Discord. Let me just send it to the chat. Yeah. And I guess for all you guys, this is just a question I have. For all you guys that talked about these different topics, what kinds of courses at Waterloo would relate to these topics? For those of you who I didn't ask, like Mary, for example, what courses should I take to learn more about traffic?
So for that, main courses for traffic are all in the civil engineering department, as well as there is some in plan. So like for transportation, it's all in like the middle digit is 2. So there's like the first one is Civ 241. And then there's also courses that I'm considering taking, like CS. So I keep on doing this. Civ 341, Civ 343. I'm taking Civ 643, and I'm thinking about taking Civ 440 next winter. A whole bunch of different ones.
Okay, sounds good. All right, on to Dmytro. Where can we find you, and what courses should I take to learn about cryptography? Hello?
Sure, you can email me. My what ID is Shynkevych, the same as my username in the chat. And you can find me on Discord as Dmytro, lowercase.
And what?
Then there's as for the topic, you can take CO 487, 485. These are the cryptography courses. If you're lucky, you can take CO 789, which is the grad level crypto course, which is offered once every 4 years or something. So don't count on it too much. You can maybe occasionally there's something interesting in the CS grad course that's about crypto, but that's there are some topics that are connected. If you want to do mathematical cryptography, you should take groups and rings, then you should take fields, then you should take probably algebraic geometry. If you want to do codes, you should take CO 331, which is codes. And codes are like classic Michaelis type thing. If you want to do security, you should take CS 456. And well, basically everything. CRISP has like a list of, and I'll link their site, but like a list of courses that relate to security. Basically, take those.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Dmytro. Christian and Jerry, where can we find you guys? And I know you guys are in first year and high school, so probably don't have too much experience with courses, but how did you learn competitive programming? I guess that's a question.
I learned competitive programming from looking at like different blogs. So some of those blogs are on Codeforces. There's like Codeforce blogs, and you can just like put in like some topic or some problem type, and there's most likely some user who has already written an article about it, or maybe there's probably going to be like multiple articles. And I'd say that's like one of my best resources.
Yeah, and for me, I mostly did the same thing as Christian. There are lots of blogs and also some websites. Like a very common one is Geeks for Geeks, where there are many of these algorithms that are shown and explained. Also, there are lots of books, like I think some great ones are Competitive Programming Handbook, which I think Christian mentioned as a resource, and also The Lower Bound for Competitive Programming by Stephen Halem. That's also a really great book that I learned by.
All right. Thanks, guys. And where can we find you on social media? How can we find you?
Most likely on like Discord or Instagram.
Yeah, same for me, Discord and Instagram.
All right, sounds good. And Neil, I know we talked about courses for you. I think I was thinking maybe if you're dealing with numbers and maybe numerical computation, what do you think about that one?
I think that would be a useful course. I think it'd be a different approach, like I mentioned at the very starting, that there's numerical differentiation, so it's a slightly different approach. But I think it's still interesting to know about. It's definitely like there's some really cool algorithms that you can do, numerical integration, for example,
Mhm.
because you can't really do symbolic integration, I think. So that's a good course, I think. I would recommend. I took an engineering version of that and I enjoyed it a lot.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I would say take machine. If you're interested in machine learning and the application there, take machine learning,
Mhm.
and they might skip automatic differentiation, but in the end, you can kind of link it together, I think. Other than that, I think these kind of things are pretty like well written about, so you can always Google it and like try writing your own. Like in my talk, I kind of explained basically how you could write your own. So try writing your own, and it's only like, I think my code only took like, let's say 80 lines of code, so it's not very long either. So try it yourself, I'd say.
Okay.
And in terms of where you can find me, I'm in the CSC Discord all the time, so you can message me there. I'm in the CSC IRC as well, and my Quest ID is N3Parikh, where Parikh is my last name, so you can email me that way as well. And yeah, if you have
Awesome.
questions about my talk, hop in, message me on the CSC Discord.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Neil. And yeah, so we're gonna collect everyone's socials. We're gonna collect their presentations and any resources they may have, and just post it on our Discord for you guys to see. And with that, thank you guys for coming. Thank you all the speakers. And to all the viewers who are currently watching right now, please make sure to fill out our post-event feedback form so that we can make this event even better next term. Also, don't be afraid to come out and apply to be a speaker next time. We're always looking for speakers with cool topics. Anyway, thanks for coming and goodbye.